Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. I know most of you here know who I am, but for the people who are watching from home, my name is Sal Sapienza. I'm the pastor here at Douglas UCC, and it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you here to our spiritual home for this very special evening, a concert with Brother Al Mascia. Brother Al is a very beloved figure in the life and history of this little church. I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. Brother Al served as the pastor here from 1996 to 2001. Some of you were members of the church back then. He is a Franciscan friar who is living and working within the Metro Detroit area, where he's been actively involved in serving the poor, the homeless, and the marginalized. Back in the 1980s, Brother Al co-founded the very first HIV/AIDS housing ministry in Chicago, and he helped establish 2 Canticle Cafes. Think of Starbucks for the homeless. In both Cincinnati and Detroit. He then took his outreach to the streets of Detroit, serving the homeless out of a bicycle cart, which a lot of news outlets picked up on. Brother Al is also committed to ecumenical and interfaith relations, and he co-founded the Song and Spirit Institute for Peace in 2011. It's a charity that's dedicated to promoting peace and relations among people of different faiths through music and the arts and community service. Drawing from his rich Franciscan heritage, Brother Al spends most of his time these days emulating the example of St. Francis of Assisi as a minstrel of God. Like St. Francis, Brother Al loves writing songs and sharing his music, and we're so grateful that he's returned here to Douglas UCC for this very special, intimate evening with us. So would you please give an extravagant Saugatuck Douglas welcome to Brother Al Mascia.
I want to warn you, there may be a little pop. Usually I'm able to mute it before I do this, but I can't do that right now. So 1, 2, 3. Not too bad, huh? Not too bad at all. I'd like to start with a song. All the steeples, they point the same. Some have crosses, some refrain. Some have moons and stars, some have angels carved, pointing the way, pointing the way. All of the people, they come to pray in so many different ways, for their heart's desire or just for what's required to make it through the day, to just get through the day. Well, in these days of struggle, will you tell me who will pray to the one who made the heavens and the sea, for some kind of revelation to help us all to understand that the God we worship is the God of every land. We sit, we stand, we bow and we kneel. We sing our hymns and some share a meal. We kiss a piece of wood or what is understood to be God's word, to be God's holy word. We ask forgiveness for our sins. We fast, we celebrate again. We give to charities and we help the least of these. What more to do? What more have we to do? Well, in these days of darkness that confound and terrorize, where the lion and the lamb still rest apart, who will help us to remember, while we all of us still can, that the God we worship is the God of every land? And if we'd only take that day of rest for what it's intended to be, would it come as a surprise that in our Maker's eyes we are all just one family? Brothers and sisters, the time has come to celebrate what makes us one. The angels will rejoice. We have no other choice to make and live, to make and live. So in these days of hope, up against legacies of hate, there's a covenant unbroken to this day. May it guide us to eternity as we journey hand in hand, worshiping the one who is the God of every land, worshiping the one who is the God of every land, of every land. Thank you. And a little story, as I was thinking about church steeples, all the steeples point the same. I was thinking about the steeple here at the Douglas Congregational United Church of Christ, because I remember when I first arrived, and I got here back the first Sunday of Advent of 1991. And I left finally after a process of evolution to become the pastor. First through privilege of call, and then installed as an official UCC pastor. I wondered, why don't we ring the steeple bells? Maybe some of you here remember the conversation that we had about that. And I was told, well, we're not sure that the steeple's strong enough to handle it. And in fact, if you look at it, it leans a little bit towards the left, which I think is curious considering this church. So we brought in some experts, and they went up to the steeple and they checked everything out, and they said, you have nothing to worry about. It's as strong as it ever will be. And so we started ringing the steeple bell before church, and I don't know if it's still done. Oh, yes, that's wonderful, wonderful. So it is so wonderful to be back here into this very sacred place. It's an honor to be before you, to share my little songs with you that tell lots of stories. I have pictures of friends and individuals here before you that I've met after I left here. And you may ask, well, what in God's name has he been up to since he left Saugatuck? Well, oh my God, so many different things. I went back to Cincinnati, and there I started a Canticle Cafe for the homeless people that were there, for the ladies of the night that would come in the early morning and needed something to eat and drink and to warm up. And I looked at some of the other warming centers that were there, and I said, they're not that dignified. They really, these people really deserve something better. So we completely transformed a shop into a a Canticle Cafe. We called it the Canticle Cafe. And just imagine a Starbucks where you don't have to pay any money. We had baristas, and we had computer stations, and it was cosmetically attractive. And so we did that in Cincinnati, and then I was transferred to Detroit, and we did the same thing there. And I thought to myself, well, you know, Alice's restaurant has a theme. So I wrote a little theme for the Canticle Cafe, which I'd like to sing for you now. You may not have a place to call your own, and the place you had to lay your head is hard to call a home. The wind off of the river, the rain, the snow, the cold. When the bottom's closer to the top, the sword of Damocles is dropped, and even if you're young, you're feeling old. There's a place of refuge near, so I've been told. At the Canticle Cafe, you don't get what you pay for. Money doesn't matter in that way. At the Canticle Cafe, you're worth more than your paycheck, valued more than customers can be. 'Cause at the Canticle Cafe, everything's free. You can't explain where thoughts like this come from, and those voices that make you afraid, they're there from sun to sun. The bustle of the city, just one more stranglehold. When the walls of fear start closing in, the clamor of the streets begin to make you want to crawl into a hole. Well, there's some peace and quiet near, so I've been told. At the Canticle Cafe, you don't get what you pay for. Money doesn't matter in that way. At the Canticle Cafe, you're worth more than your paycheck, valued more than customers can be. 'Cause at the Canticle Cafe, everything's free. If saying no would really do the trick, well, you'd be free from this enslavery instead of being sick. The needle, bottle, or the pill will always take their toll. When what used to make you feel so grand has now assumed the upper hand, when chemicals and substances control. Well, there's a higher power near, so I've been told. At the Canticle Cafe, you don't get what you pay for. Money doesn't matter in that way. At the Canticle Cafe, you're worth more than your paycheck, valued more than customers can be. 'Cause at the Canticle Cafe, everything's free. 'Cause at the Canticle Cafe, everything's free. So when you do something like what I did, you get to meet a lot of people. And I entered into relationships with so many people who live on the margins of our society. People who were homeless, people who were at high risk for being homeless, people who have chemical dependency issues, as I just sang about, people who have mental health issues that I just sang about. And all these things contribute to people winding up on the street, winding up in need. And there was this one person that I got to know from the Canticle Cafe in Detroit. And her name was Linda del Signore. Now, any Italian speakers there can translate that. Linda of the Lord. Linda del Signore. And she was someone who would come to our place virtually every day. She lived out on the street, and we would provide her with new clothing pretty much every day and supplies that she would need. And she was a beautiful, wonderful woman. And we tried to get her into the social service agency so she can get some entitlements. But that never worked out because she had this one dream. She had this one solution in her mind that would take care of all of the problems and challenges she was being faced with. She wanted to become a nun. Well, but she was also quite mentally ill. And she didn't have any substance abuse problems, but she did have some mental health problems. And unfortunately, there was no place for her in the convent. So we worked with her as best we could. We could never get her housed. She insisted, always insisted, on living out on the streets. And the way things worked out is, at that time, we friars were living on the top floor of the Chancery building of the Archdiocese of Detroit, 1234 Washington Boulevard. And I could see from my room, Capitol Park. And Linda del Signore, Linda of the Lord, would always go there at night, and that's where she would go to sleep. And I could look out my window, and I could see her huddled there, and I could see the cigarette smoke going up and swirling around. And at least I knew she was safe. And then in the morning, I'd peek out my window to see if she was there, if there was any sign of movement or at least some cigarette smoke arising from where she was. And then there was this one morning, and I looked out of my window, and I didn't see her. And so the first thing I did after our friary morning prayer is I went down, I got on our bicycle cart, because our hospitality ministry had evolved from the Canticle Cafe, after losing that building, unfortunately, to bicycle carts, Canticle Cafe bicycle carts. And we would take 4 of them out, and one would have hot beverages, one would have food, one would have personal hygiene products, one would have clothing, and that's how we were extending and offering Franciscan hospitality without a building anymore. So I got on my bicycle cart and I started driving around downtown Detroit, around Capitol Park, and that's when I saw her. She was lying down in front of an abandoned storefront. And I called our nurse, and then 911, and the nurse said, "Take your knuckle and start rubbing it up and down her sternum to see if you can wake her up." So I was doing that to no avail. And then the paramedics arrived. And I knew at that point in time that she had gone. And I waited, and they put her in the EMT ambulance, and after about 15 minutes, they came back, and they told me what I had expected to hear. And so I wrote this song about Linda del Signore, who just didn't fit in, and is now, I'm sure, a saint in heaven. I looked out my window that January morn, searching to find your huddled form. I held my breath as I came to realize you were nowhere to be seen. Tell me, what could this mean? Well, the day before, as you lit a cigarette, you said you were fine, we shouldn't fret. You had a sister, you promised me you'd call. We shouldn't be worried at all. You said, no need to be worried at all. Well, the day we met as was in the summertime, and we sat cross-legged as you tried to find that elusive something that didn't seem to be in your purse that looked empty to me. What was it that I couldn't see? And Lady Linda of the Lord, how sad the world chose to ignore your fragile life, so brief, so poor. Lady Linda of the Lord, Lady Linda of the Lord. Now Detroit winters are harsh and cold, but this one would freeze the devil's soul. The shopkeeper said you had better go inside if you wanted to wake up alive, he warned, if you wanted to wake up alive. Well, there's more than one world, it seems to be. One you can touch and one it takes special eyes to see. Well, I found you there, your blouse blowing in the wind. No gloves, no hat, no coat, nothing to save you from the brutal winter cold. When they came, I didn't need to be told. There was nothing they could say I didn't know. So, Lady Linda of the Lord, how sad the world chose to ignore your fragile life, so brief, so poor. Lady Linda of the Lord, Lady Linda of the Lord. Now you're free, no more suffering for you, and I know where you're at, you see all things true. There are countless more like the way you used to be. Linda, help us to all better see. Help us to all better see. And Lady Linda of the Lord, how sad the world chose to ignore your fragile life, so brief, so poor. Lady Linda of the Lord, Lady Linda of the Lord, Lady Linda of the Lord. Thank you. If you go to my website, brotheral.org, there's a section there about being in the news, and that news story is there about Linda Del Signore, about the Canticle Cafe. So if you want any more background information on these story songs, that's where to go. And they're a little sad sometimes, but not this one. Not this one at all. You see that? I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little lady over there sitting on a piano. And both the little lady and the piano will be incorporated into a couple of my other songs. The little lady there, her name is Leona, and she would come to the Canticle Cafe every morning religiously. And she just always brightened up the place, which could sometimes be inhabited by some, pretty rough and tumble fellows. But she would come nonetheless and take her tea and sit and watch the people around her, and people watch. But she had this little predilection. Linda loved brooches. And she had a brooch for every season. If you couldn't remember what season it was, just look at Leona's brooch. And she was one of my favorite friends in Detroit. And I remember there was a studio that served drinks and wings, and it was just a fun place. And they invited Linda in, and I got to sing the song for her. So she's just an example of some of the people that I met. I've learned so much from. Some of the people that I've met have provided examples of how to live joyfully and peacefully and without as much stress as many of us unfortunately have to contend with, and have provided for me over these years wonderful models. So this song is about Leona. Leona has a brooch and a smile for every season. She don't need to have a reason to be glad. Leona takes her walk every day without exception. She always goes the same direction, like a stream. And she takes her tea and she sits quietly at the cafe downtown. And she sits where she can look around. Leona has a way of disarming your pretensions. She gives you her full attention, like gravity. Leona, more than most, has a certain way about her. You don't need to ever doubt her sincerity. And when you look in her eyes, you might just realize how a simple soul helps the world feel less out of control. Leona's changed her brooch from a pumpkin with a black cat to a pilgrim with a top hat and buckle shoes. And it won't be too long till she puts on the one that's my favorite kind. That'll mean it'll be Christmas time. Leona has a brooch and a smile for every season. Now a song about that little piano. We had some generous benefactors who were able to take this very rudimentary warming centers that we Friars were operating for quite some time in Detroit. But when I got there, I knew we could do better. And so I was able to get some benefactors, spiritual friends, as we Franciscans call them sometimes, to help pay for a remodeling of this old warming center that had card tables and a little black and white TV with rabbit ears and aluminum foil on the end. And we're not talking the 1950s. No, we're talking the 2000s. And so we were able to transform this Canticle Cafe to a much more dignified place. Again, as I said earlier, we couldn't afford a decent piano, but we still wanted some music there. And so one morning, I happened to be the only one at the Canticle Cafe. And we'd made the coffee, and I had the donuts ready for people to go, and there was food, and there was drink, and there was juice. And the first person who walked into the cafe that morning was this tall, young man. And this is just another example of not being able to tell a book by its cover, because something inside of me said, I wonder if he's a member of one of the local gangs in our neighborhood. I confess to that. That was my first gut reaction, because he did look younger than most of our patrons. But I served him. I gave him his warm, refreshing beverage and something to eat. And he didn't say a word, not a word. And he walked away from our little bistro place, our little bistro region, an area of the cafe, to a place which was more of a dining room. And it was very nicely set up. And I said to myself, it sure is quiet here. Maybe I should turn on some music. And just before I went to do that, I started to hear Pachelbel's canon being played on that old piano, missing some keys. And, Peter, I don't even know if you would be able to do, even with your skill set. No, I take that back, because if Isaac was able to touch my heart and make me cry, I'm sure you'd be able to do a lot more. But just goes to show you don't know people's narratives, people's experiences, what they've gone through. And certainly you can't tell a book by its cover. So this is called Isaac's Song. Pachelbel's cannon sounded sweet, played by a young man from the street on a piano, missing some keys. Pachelbel's cannon heretofore had never made me cry before, till I heard Isaac play it for me. He was the first one in the cafe on that day. He was the youngest one by far. Silently, silently, he took his food and drink and walked away. Moments later, he would touch my heart. Pachelbel's cannon sounded sweet, played by a young man from the street on a piano, missing some keys. Pachelbel's cannon heretofore had never made me cry before, till I heard Isaac play it for me. Somewhere between the womb and homelessness set in, young Isaac must have heard a song. Someone had shown his little fingers the way. Now that's what keeps him hanging on. Pachelbel's cannon sounded sweet, played by a young man from the street on a piano, missing some keys. Pachelbel's cannon heretofore had never made me cry before, till I heard Isaac play it for me. They say the Bible says that we don't live by bread alone. That would include the down and out. Why should just some of us enjoy life's finer things when so many others go without? Thank you. So, it's not easy to try and do good sometimes. And we deal with, just by the nature of our ministry, a lot of people who have various opinions on how to care for our brothers and sisters who are in need. And I remember one experience when I was in Cincinnati at the Canticle Cafe in Cincinnati, and this woman came up to me and she said, "You know, you're doing it all wrong. You're doing it all wrong. You really shouldn't be giving all this stuff away for free. And, you know, you're just really making it, you're being codependent, you're being enabling, all those nice psychological terms that she was using. But I knew she really cared, and this was maybe one of the fastest songs that I ever wrote. And it's called Where They're At. And there are like 3 parts to it. There's this woman who just thinks that sociologically we're doing more harm than good by just not showing tough love with the homeless. And then there's this guy who had just gone hunting, and he came back with lots of venison. And he said, "Brother, keep it, but only give it to the worthy poor." And then there was this guest who had come to the cafe, and he was like this one character in St. Francis's life that Francis could never please. They call him the ungrateful leper. Nothing he could do would make him feel comfortable. The blankets were always too rough. The food was always too bad. He was always complaining. And I bumped into someone like that at the Canticle Cafe. Meanwhile, another guest there overheard the exchange and made her own recommendations. The other day, a woman looked me straight between the eyes. She asked me why we do the things we do. If you really want to help the poor and homeless in the world, stop giving them those handouts of free food. She said what we were doing was in fact more harm than good, encouraging dependence, sloth, and greed. Why would anyone look for a job or ever go to work when we were giving all these things for free? I looked at her, took a breath, tried to smile. Well, I knew she really cared, and if it took a little while, I'd tell her why we go the extra mile. I said we take people where they're at, wherever that may be. If judging's to be done, it won't be done by me. The last time that I looked, the gospel seemed to say, you freely have been given, so freely give away. Another day, a gentleman just back from hunting deer, his pickup filled with venison galore. He said, brother, you can have all this, just promise me one thing, it'll only go to feed the worthy poor. He said, I have no problem giving help to those in need, especially those who cannot help themselves. But both you and I know very well that some will come along who don't deserve what's on your pantry shelves. I looked at him, took a breath and tried to smile. Well, I knew he really cared, and if it took a little while, I'd do my best to answer in my style. I said we take people where they're at, wherever that may be. If judging's to be done, it won't be done by me. The last time that I looked, the gospel seemed to say, you freely have been given, so freely give away. An angry guest, dissatisfied with everything one day, lambasted me with words I can't repeat. Another guest who overheard could not believe her ears. Could anybody be so indiscreet? She said she was embarrassed by the angry guest's display. Such disrespectful treatment a disgrace. She highly recommended and quite serious advice we ban such uncouth people from our place. I looked at her, took a breath, tried to smile. Well, I knew she really cared, and if it took a little while, she'd understand why we put up with trial. I said we take people where they're at, wherever that may be. If judging's to be begun, it won't be done by me. The last time that I looked, the gospel seemed to say, you freely have been given, so freely give away. I said we take people where they're at, wherever that may be. If judging's to be done, won't be done by me. The last time that I looked, the gospel seemed to say, you freely have been given, so freely give away. The other day a woman looked me straight between the eyes. She asked me why we do the things we do. The things we do. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see. Okay, we're getting close to an hour. Do you have suitability and patience for a little more? You do? Okay, good. Well, one of the things that I miss most about not living here anymore is the absolute beauty of this region. So today, while I had some time, I just started driving around the neighborhoods. And I went over to the lake, and I saw all the beautiful trees. And I went down Center Street, and I saw that, oh my, someone's taken down the wages of sin is death sign. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. So we've heard many of my story songs, but now, because I am a Franciscan religious, I do believe in God. I have this thing for religion. It's a little different than most people because I haven't stayed in the same one for all of my life. But nonetheless, one of the things that I think is so important is to thank God for the beauty that surrounds us. And the beauty that surrounds us here in this region of Michigan is inarguable. And always, sometimes you could take it for granted, but always it's important to have that attitude of gratitude, to thank God. So this song does contain a little bit of Latin. Just a little bit of Latin, because sometimes just a little bit of Latin is, you need that. So instead of saying, thank you, God, we're going to say, Deo Grazias. It just seems a little more, I don't know, panache. So here we go. Deo Grazias. For the beauty of the earth, of the sky and the universe, for the rhapsody God's handiwork. Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, for the fathoms of the sea, that which makes up you and me, for the rain that feeds all of the plants and trees. Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, for the blue whale's majesty, the butterfly's fragility, for all pandas, penguins, chimpanzees. Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias. Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, for the holy human heart, set to beat by God's own spark, for the love that it alone imparts. Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias. Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, for all that we cannot see, the elegance of mystery, for those glimpses of eternity. Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias, Deo Grazias. Amen. Thank you. Christianity, no matter what part of the Reformation you experienced, no matter what denomination you're in, we share some very early materials, some very early sources. And they're some of the most beautiful resources that we have. And I wrote this song inspired by the writings of the desert mothers and fathers. Maybe some of you have heard of the desert mothers and fathers. This was around the time Emperor Constantine decided he was going to take Christianity and turn it into the approved religion of the empire. Well, that didn't settle well with some people. And so some women and men just retreated to the deserts and said, we're going to get out while the getting is good. And they wrote these little tales from the desert. And there's a beautiful one that has to do with self-transformation and change. And I think especially for where we're at in our country, in our world, we need change. And this particular tale tells the story about a conversation, a relation, and a transformation that took place between a young monk and we call them masters, your elder, who's in charge of your formation. And I call it the young monk's query. From the Desert Fathers and Mothers. I read a short story many years ago when I was still young and when life was still slow. Part of a collection of ancient tales one told to those who were old, by those who were, to those who were young, by those who were old. Did I sing this one yet? No? Sometimes I lose track. And so it goes once upon a time, back when people asked questions of the mystical kind, there was this young monk, and just a novice, they say, went to see his old master for some counsel one day. And he fell on his knees as tears filled his eyes. He clutched at his habit, no, he could not disguise that his hunger for holiness was unsatisfied. What more than praying and fasting and could his master advise? Well, the old monk listened to the young monk he loved, and he stretched out his hands up to heaven above. The young monk beheld, and he watched what transpired as the elder's 10 fingers became 10 lamps of fire. Now stories come and stories go. I remember some and others no. Some are short and some are long, and then there are curious ones that sometimes become a song. And so it was once upon a time, when the holy and sacred still enraptured humankind, there was this young monk with a holy desire who decided one day to be changed into fire. I read a short story many years ago I was still young, and when life was still slow. What in God's name has Brother Al been up to? Well, a number of years ago, I was told that I had a health condition that put me in touch with my mortality. And, but I was also getting an award for my work in Detroit. And my mother flew in with my girl cousin, Tony Ann, for the event. And I had just gone through a procedure that made it very uncomfortable to be standing up at an awards ceremony. But I did it. But that prompted me to sit down and have a heart-to-heart talk with my mother, who has been living in New York City all these years. And I said, listen, if something were to happen to me and I got sick, you'd have to drop what you were doing in New York, and I know you'd fly here. And likewise, if something were to go wrong with you and you were to fall ill, I would have to drop everything that I'm doing here and go there. I think it's time, given our ages and our health, that we need to live in the same town again. And thank God she said yes. At 80 years old, she's going to move from her favorite place in the world, leave her friends behind, and come to live where her son is living. And so for the next few years, I was her primary caregiver. And I did the best that I could. Lots of doctor's appointments. I'm sure some of you have been in the same situation or similar situation. I really tried hard. I really did my best. And one of the things that I did with some regularity, at least a few times a week, is I'd go to the Kroger's parking lot. I go to the Kroger's shopping center and do her grocery shopping. And she had some pretty esoteric tastes, and so I'd be going back quite a few times. And I got to know this young man whose job it was to collect Kroger's parking lots from, you know, there are people out there who will not return their shopping carts to where they belong, and they just leave them all out there. Well, there's enough of those people in the world for there to be a job for someone to go collect it. And I got to know this young man, and he was always so filled with joy, kind of like Leona, but happy. And these days especially, I hadn't been seeing that many happy faces. So I got to know him a little bit, and I discovered he loves his job. He loves his life. He finds joy in virtually every aspect of his being and his circumstances. And I said, can you rub a little bit of that off on me? I could use that. My life's a little rough right now. And so sometimes when I write a song, I'll write it as that person. I'm sure there's a term for that, which I have forgotten. But I thought I knew enough about him and his life to write this song from his point of view. It was pretty clear that he had some mental challenges, which only endeared me more to him anyway. And so I wrote this little song called I Love My Job, from his point of view. I still live with my mother, I guess I always will. She says I am her treasure, she says I shouldn't feel any less important than anybody else. She says God doesn't make mistakes, so I'm pretty good, I guess. I get up every morning, have my breakfast the same way. They say that it's the most important meal to have each day. Put on my yellow safety vest, the one I like a lot. Collecting all the shopping carts at the Kroger's parking lot. And I love my job. I love my job. Well, I see lots of people every day. Some seem happy, some seem sad. I smile if they should look my way. If they smile back, then I'm glad. Don't matter if it's raining, don't matter if it's hot. There are always plenty shopping carts at the Kroger's parking lot. And I love my job. I love my job. My sister picks me up when she gets off from work, and then she asks me how my day went on a scale of 1 to 10. She laughs when I say 11. I laugh and ask why not. Just happy to be working at the Kroger's parking lot. And I love my job. I love my job. Thank you. A little over 8:10, so I don't want to keep anyone here any longer than your suitability, but one more? One more? Okay. Let's see, one more. How about, okay, so this is more overtly a Christian song. Some of you may recall that after Jesus was risen from the dead, a post-resurrection event, he's there cooking breakfast, which I always like that kind of story. He's kind of cooking breakfast for the disciples. They're fishing. He comes back. You know, he's making some nice fresh fish. I don't know if it's blackened or not, but anyway, but he's just doing some fishing. And I've taken a little bit of poetic license here because I'm sure that there were seagulls there as well. Well, there was fish frying on the fire, and the sea was lapping on the shore. There were seagulls laughing up above it all. Oh my God, who could ask for any more? Oh my God, who could ask for any more? So do you love me? Peter asks Saint Peter. Jesus asked St. Peter, do you love me more than all the rest? Yes, I love you, Lord, and yes, I do believe of all here gathered, I love you the very best. Of all here gathered, I love you the very best. Now a seagull perching on some driftwood cocked its head at Peter's bold reply. And then Jesus leaned closer to St. Peter, and with the seagull looked him straight between the eyes. And with the seagull looked him straight between the eyes. Then feed my people, Jesus told St. Peter. Feed my people and care for them, I say. 'Cause if you love me more than all here gathered, then what I ask of you, you'll do without delay. What I ask of you, you'll do without delay. Now with a mouthful of the breakfast set before him, Peter's eyes began to look surprised as he slowly grasped through comprehension that loving Jesus meant more than he'd realized. That loving Jesus meant more than he'd realized. So do you love me? I hear Jesus asking. Do you love me? Are we more than just friends? 'Cause if you love me more than a passing passion, then be prepared to become my very hands. Jesus, help us to become your very hands. Your very hands. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming.